George Reyes, Earth's diplomat to the planet Barza, watches in horror as Princess Juno is dragged away by armed guards. The Barzan princess, her iridescent scales shimmering under the palace lights, struggles against her captors. Her cries echo through the grand hall, filled with alien dignitaries who remain frozen in shocked silence. King Zornak's voice booms across the room, his words sending chills down George's spine. "Today I shall breed an heir with Princess Juno," the monarch declares. His wrinkled green skin sags, 3 milky eyes gleaming with cruel intent. The elderly alien's appearance belies the iron grip he holds over his subjects. The gathered aliens bow their heads, bound by cultural norms and the king's absolute authority. George's fists clench at his sides, human morality clashing with diplomatic protocol. He can't stand idle while this atrocity unfolds. As the procession moves towards the breeding chambers, George follows. His Earth Federation credentials grant him access through security checkpoints. Guards eye him warily, but don't obstruct his path. The human's heart pounds as he approaches the chamber doors. Inside, King Zornak looms over Juno. The princess, strapped to a clinical-looking table, continues her futile struggle. George steps forward, voice steady despite his racing pulse. "In the name of Earth and its allies, I demand you halt this proceeding immediately." The room falls silent. King Zornak turns, confusion evident in his trio of eyes. "Human, you overstep your bounds," he growls. George stands his ground. "Your actions violate multiple interstellar treaties. The consequences will be severe if you continue." His hand hovers near his communication device, implying the threat of off-world intervention. The king hesitates, uncertainty clouding his features. It's the opening George needs. He lunges for Juno's restraints, fingers working swiftly to release her. The princess leaps up, positioning herself behind her unlikely savior. Chaos erupts. Guards rush forward, weapons raised. George grabs Juno's hand, and they bolt for the exit. Their feet pound against polished floors as they race through ornate corridors. Alarms blare, the cacophony spurring them onward. They burst into the warm Barzan night. A hover vehicle sits unattended nearby. George jumps in, helping Juno aboard. With a prayer to whatever cosmic forces might be listening, he activates the unfamiliar controls. The vehicle lurches forward, nearly clipping a palace wall before soaring into the sky. As they speed towards the dense jungle surrounding the city, reality crashes down on George. He's jeopardized Earth's diplomatic relations with the Barzans. He's sparked a potential interstellar incident, and now he's responsible for the safety of an alien princess. Juno's voice cuts through his thoughts. "Thank you," she says, her alien features softening with gratitude. Despite the gravity of their situation, George feels a flutter in his chest. The jungle canopy looms ahead, offering temporary sanctuary. But in the distance, the whine of pursuing vehicles grows louder. George tightens his grip on the controls. Their escape is far from over, and the consequences of his actions are just beginning to unfold. As they plunge into the dense foliage, one thought dominates George's mind. He needs to find a way off this planet, and fast. The fate of 2 worlds now rests in his hands. The dense Barzan jungle enveloped George and Juno as they plunged deeper into its depths, the whine of pursuing vehicles fading behind them. George's fist clenched on the hover vehicle's controls, his mind racing as fast as their stolen craft. "We need to find somewhere to regroup," he said, glancing at Juno. Her iridescent scales shimmered in the dappled light filtering through the canopy. "I think I know a place." Juno nodded, her alien features taut with tension. "Where?" "There's an Earth outpost on the far side of the planet. It's our best shot at safety and planning our next move." As they sped through the verdant maze, Juno's voice cut through the rush of air. "George, you need to understand the gravity of what we've done." She explained the intricate web of Barzan politics, her words painting a grim picture. "My union with Zornak was meant to unite 2 powerful factions. Our escape, it could plunge Barza into civil war." George's stomach twisted. The stakes were even higher than he'd realized. Before he could respond, the hover vehicle sputtered and died, its fuel reserves depleted. They coasted to a stop in a small clearing. "Looks like we're on foot from here," George said, helping Juno out of the vehicle. As night fell, the jungle transformed. Bioluminescent plants cast an eerie glow, turning the forest into an alien wonderland. George relied on his survival training, while Juno's knowledge of local flora and fauna proved invaluable. They navigated through glowing swamps, their feet sinking into spongy ground with each step. "Watch out!" Juno yanked George back just as a vine-like creature snapped at the space where his head had been. "Carnivorous flora. It's drawn to body heat." They pressed on, their progress slowed by the need for constant vigilance. Strange cries echoed through the night, reminding them of the deadly predators that called this jungle home. As dawn broke, a new threat emerged. A low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. George and Juno ducked behind a massive, gnarled tree just as a sleek craft zipped overhead. "Grack," Juno whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Zornak's top assassin and tracker. If he's here, we're in serious trouble." George peered around the tree, watching the craft land in a nearby clearing. A reptilian figure emerged, flanked by a small team of soldiers. Even from a distance, Grack's predatory grace was evident. "We need to move," George said. "The Earth outpost isn't far now." They quickened their pace, painfully aware of the closing net around them. Hours passed in a blur of green foliage and pounding hearts. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, they stumbled upon an ancient stone structure, half hidden by vines and moss. "A Barzan ruin," Juno breathed, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "These are rare. Most were destroyed during the last civil war." They entered cautiously, marveling at the intricate carvings that covered the walls. In the center of the main chamber, a pedestal held a collection of strange devices. George approached, drawn by an inexplicable pull. "Careful," Juno warned. "Those are powerful artifacts. Legends say they can disrupt Barzan technology." George's hand closed around a small, cylindrical object. It hummed to life, emitting a soft blue glow. "This could be our advantage against Grack." Before they could explore further, a menacing voice echoed through the chamber. "I must commend you on leading such an entertaining chase." They spun to see Grack blocking the entrance, his team of elite soldiers fanning out behind him. The assassin's eyes gleamed with cruel anticipation, razor-sharp claws flexing at his sides. George raised the artifact, its glow intensifying. Grack's confident smirk faltered as his wrist-mounted computer sparked and died. What happened next defied explanation. As Grack's soldiers rushed forward, Juno cried out, raising her hands instinctively. An invisible force slammed into the attackers, sending them flying backwards. Juno stared at her hands in shock, then at George. What just happened?" she gasped. There was no time to ponder. George grabbed another artifact, tossing it to Juno. Together they fought their way out of the ruin, unleashing waves of energy that short-circuited weapons and sent their attackers reeling. In the chaos, George and Juno found themselves face-to-face with Grack. The assassin snarled, lunging forward with lightning speed. Juno's newfound abilities flared to life once more, catching Grack mid-leap and slamming him into a stone pillar. He slumped to the ground, unconscious. As the dust settled, George and Juno stood amidst the incapacitated soldiers, chests heaving. Their eyes met, a moment of intense connection passing between them. The air crackled with more than just residual energy from the artifacts. "We should go," George said softly, breaking the spell. Juno nodded, her scales flushing with a deeper hue. They emerged from the ruin, artifacts in hand, the weight of their discoveries heavy on their minds. As they resumed their journey towards the Earth outpost, a glint in the sky caught George's attention. A Barzan military shuttle streaked across the horizon, a stark reminder that their ordeal was nowhere near the end. George and Juno exchanged a determined look. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. With renewed purpose, they plunged back into the jungle, the Earth outpost their beacon of hope in a world turned upside down. The Earth outpost loomed ahead, its camouflaged exterior blending seamlessly with the surrounding rock formations. George felt a surge of relief as he guided Juno towards the hidden entrance, the jungle's oppressive heat giving way to cool, recycled air. Earth Federation Diplomatic Corps, Authorization code Tango Echo 973. George spoke into the concealed comm panel. A moment of tense silence followed, before a soft chime signaled their clearance. As the door slid open, they stumbled inside, exhaustion finally catching up with them. A small team of human personnel rushed forward, their expressions a mix of surprise and concern. Ambassador Reyes. A tall woman with short-cropped gray hair stepped forward, her crisp uniform identifying her as the ranking officer. I'm Colonel Sarah Hawkins. We weren't expecting company. George straightened, mustering what dignity he could despite his disheveled appearance. Colonel, we need asylum. The situation is far more complicated than you know. Colonel Hawkins's eyes darted to Juno, taking in her alien features and the strange artifacts clutched in her hands. I can see that. Follow me. As they made their way through the facility's sterile corridors, George quickly recounted their harrowing escape. Colonel Hawkins's frown deepened with each passing moment. You've created quite the diplomatic mess, Ambassador, she said, ushering them into a secure briefing room. The Barzan government has already issued a statement. They're calling you a kidnapper and painting Princess Juno as a victim of human interference. Juno's scales flashed with indignation. That's absurd. George saved me from a culturally sanctioned ritual as far as the galactic community is concerned. Colonel Hawkins interrupted. Earth is facing immense pressure to hand you both over. George's heart sank. He'd known there would be consequences, but the reality of the situation was hitting him full force. Before he could respond, a petite woman in a lab coat entered the room. Colonel, I need to examine our guests immediately, she said, her dark eyes scanning George and Juno with professional intensity. I'm Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Chief Medical Officer of this outpost. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical scans and debriefings. George watched with growing fascination as Dr. Rodriguez's expression shifted from concentration to outright amazement during Juno's examination. This is remarkable, Dr. Rodriguez muttered, staring at a holographic display of Juno's genetic structure. Princess, are you aware that you possess an extremely rare genetic mutation? Juno blinked in surprise. No, I had no idea. Dr. Rodriguez's fingers danced across her datapad. It's present in less than 0.1% of the Barzan population, and these energy readings, she gestured to the artifacts they'd brought from the ruins. The interaction between your genetic anomaly and these devices seems to have triggered latent abilities, telekinetic abilities, to be precise. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. George found himself stealing glances at Juno, seeing her in a new light. Their eyes met, and he felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with ancient artifacts or genetic mutations. Their moment was shattered by the blaring of alarms. Colonel Hawkins rushed to a nearby console, her face paling as she read the incoming data. We've got company, she announced grimly. Barzan military forces, led by General Kraz, they've surrounded the outpost. A gruff voice crackled over the outpost communication system. This is General Kraz of the Barzan Defense Force. You are harboring fugitives. Surrender Ambassador Reyes and Princess Juno immediately or face the consequences. Colonel Hawkins's heart made as she responded. This is Colonel Sarah Hawkins of the Earth Federation. Ambassador Reyes has diplomatic immunity, and we have no official extradition request for Princess Juno. Until we receive proper documentation and can ensure their safety, they will remain under our protection. You have 24 hours to comply, General Kraz growled before cutting the communication. The tension in the room was palpable. George felt the weight of his actions pressing down on him, threatening to crush him. He turned to Juno, ready to apologize, to somehow make this right. But Juno's eyes had gone distant, her scales shimmering with an otherworldly light. She swayed on her feet and George rushed to steady her. Juno, what's wrong? When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from far away. I see a city, a Barzan city, but ancient. There are others like me, so many others. They're using their minds to build, to heal, to create wonders. Dr. Rodriguez hurried over, scanner in hand. Her brainwave patterns are off the charts. It seems she's experiencing some kind of vision. Juno's eyes snapped back into focus, locking onto George with an intensity that took his breath away. It wasn't just political, she gasped. Zorac, the breeding program, they're trying to unlock these abilities in the royal bloodline. As Juno shared the details of her vision, the pieces began to fall into place. A conspiracy spanning generations, the suppression of telekinetic abilities, the true motives behind King Zornak's desperate grab for power. Their discussion was cut short by Colonel Hawkins. We've got another problem. General Kraz has initiated a jamming field. We're cut off from Earth. George's mind raced, weighing their limited options. Surrender was unthinkable. An escape seemed impossible with the Barzan forces surrounding them. That left only one choice, as dangerous as it was. The artifacts, he said, turning to Juno. If we can use them to amplify your abilities, we might have a chance against Kraz's forces. Dr. Rodriguez shook her head vehemently. It's too risky. We have no idea what that level of power could do to her physiology. Before they could argue further, a commotion erupted in the corridor outside. The door slid open, revealing a familiar reptilian figure, flanked by armed outpost security. Grack, Juno breathed, instinctively stepping closer to George. The assassin's eyes darted around the room, finally settling on George and Juno. We need to talk, he said, his gravelly voice carrying an unexpected note of urgency. I can help you escape, but we don't have much time. George tensed, ready for a trap, but Grack's next words stopped him cold. Zorac is a threat to our people, the assassin continued. What I've seen, what you can do. He looked at Juno with a mixture of fear and awe. It changes everything. Help me stop him, and I'll get you out of here. As the countdown to General Kraz's deadline ticked away, George found himself facing an impossible choice. Trust the assassin who had hunted them, risk Juno's life by experimenting with her newfound powers, or surrender and face the consequences of his actions. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and time was running out. Out. George took a deep breath, his mind racing through their limited options. The weight of his diplomatic training warred with the desperate need for action. We don't have a choice, he said finally, turning to Juno. We need to use the artifacts to amplify your abilities. It's our only chance. Juno nodded, her scales shimmering with a mix of fear and purpose. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, her expression grim. I'll calibrate the devices, but I must stress the dangers involved, she said, carefully attaching the artifacts to Juno's temples and wrists. We have no idea how this level of power might affect your physiology. As Dr. Rodriguez worked, Colonel Hawkins initiated their diversionary tactic. The outpost's defense systems hummed to life, launching a series of low-yield electromagnetic pulses. Outside, the Barzan forces' communication equipment crackled and died, plunging their attackers into temporary chaos. Now's our chance, Hawkins said, her voice taut with tension. The underground tunnel is prepped and ready. Go. George gently guided Juno towards the hidden entrance. As they stepped into the dimly lit passage, Juno activated the artifacts. The effect was immediate and breathtaking. Her body lifted off the ground, enveloped in an ethereal blue glow. Her eyes, once a deep amber, now shimmered with an otherworldly light. Juno? George whispered, awed by her transformation. She turned to him, her voice resonating with newfound power. I'm okay, George. I feel incredible. They pressed on through the tunnel, emerging into the pre-dawn jungle. The air was thick with humidity and the chirping of alien insects. As they oriented themselves, a familiar figure stepped out from behind a massive fern. Right on time, Grack growled, gesturing towards a sleek Barzan scout ship hidden beneath a canopy of vines. Let's move. Before they could take another step, a searing bolt of energy tore through the foliage. General Kraz emerged from the underbrush, flanked by a squad of elite Barzan soldiers. Did you really think it would be that easy? Kraz sneered, his weapon trained on George. Chaos erupted. Juno, her powers amplified beyond belief, unleashed a wave of telekinetic energy. Barzan soldiers were lifted off their feet, sent flying through the air like rag dolls. George ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding a barrage of energy blasts. He grappled with two Barzan warriors, using their own momentum to slam them into the ground. Dr. Rodriguez, who had followed them to monitor Juno's condition, cried out in pain as a stray energy blast caught her in the shoulder. George rushed to her aid, dragging her behind the cover of a fallen tree. "Go!" Rodriguez gasped, clutching her wound. "I'll be fine. You need to get Juno out of here." George hesitated for a split second before nodding grimly. He turned back to the fray, just in time to see General Kraz fire a specialized dampening field at Juno. The blue glow surrounding her flickered and died, her connection to the artifacts severed. She crumpled to the ground, her eyes wide with shock. In that moment, Grack revealed his true colors. He grabbed the weakened Juno, restraining her with practiced ease. "Nothing personal," he said, aiming his weapon at George. "Just following orders." George's heart sank. He had known trusting Grack was a risk, but he hadn't expected this level of betrayal. As he raised his hands in surrender, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Colonel Hawkins called out. She emerged from the jungle, leading a team of Earth Special Forces. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy, trained on the Barzan forces. The firefight intensified. Energy blasts crisscrossed the clearing, scorching trees and kicking up clouds of debris. In the confusion, a stray shot struck one of the ancient artifacts Juno had been wearing. It pulsed with unstable energy, creating a localized gravity distortion. George felt an immense pull, drawing him towards the overloading device. Fighting against the intense gravitational force, he reached out and grabbed the artifact. As his fingers closed around it, energy surged through his body. His muscles tensed, strength flooding his limbs. His senses sharpened, the world around him seeming to slow down. With a burst of speed he didn't know he possessed, George broke free from the gravity well. He launched himself at Grack, catching the assassin off guard. In a flurry of enhanced movement, George overpowered him, freeing Juno from his grasp. "George?" Juno gasped, her powers slowly returning. "How did you—" "No time to explain," he said, pulling her to her feet. "We need to end this." They stood back to back, facing the remaining Barzan forces. Juno's telekinetic blast complemented George's enhanced physical prowess, creating a formidable defense. Together they pushed back against their attackers, slowly turning the tide of the battle. General Kraz, realizing his plan was falling apart, snarled in frustration. He raised a communication device, his finger hovering over a glowing red button. "If I can't have you," he growled, "no one will. Orbital strike incoming." George's temporary powers were fading, but he summoned every ounce of strength he had left. He lunged forward, crossing the distance between them in the blink of an eye. He and Kraz grappled for control of the device, their struggle desperate and primal. With a final surge of effort, George wrenched the communicator from Kraz's grasp. He smashed it against a nearby rock, the device shattering into useless fragments. The threat of orbital bombardment died with it. As the dust settled, George found himself surrounded by the battered but victorious Earth forces. Colonel Hawkins approached, a rare smile on her face. "Not bad for a diplomat," she said, clapping him on the shoulder. They quickly regrouped, helping Dr. Rodriguez to her feet and securing the captured Barzan soldiers. Grack, still stunned from George's attack, was bound and placed under heavy guard. "We need to move," Hawkins said, gesturing towards the scout ship. "It won't take long for reinforcements to arrive." As they boarded the vessel, Juno's eyes lit up with a renewed inner fire. "Wait," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "During my enhanced state, I saw something. A vision of an ancient Barzan city. I think it holds the key to unlocking our people's true potential." George took the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the unfamiliar controls. "Do you have coordinates?" Juno nodded, quickly inputting a series of numbers into the navigation system. The engines hummed to life, and they lifted off, narrowly evading a barrage of fire from the arriving Barzan reinforcements. As they soared into the upper atmosphere, George glanced at Juno. Her scales shimmered with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Their eyes met, and he felt a surge of emotion that had nothing to do with artifacts or enhanced abilities. "We'll figure this out," he said softly, reaching out to squeeze her hand. together. Juno's grip tightened on his, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken feelings between them. But as the scout ship accelerated towards their destination, they both knew that the challenges ahead left little room for exploring those emotions. The ancient city awaited, holding secrets that could reshape the future of the Barzan people. And behind them, the forces of King Zorac would undoubtedly be in pursuit, determined to reclaim what they saw as rightfully theirs. George set his jaw, focusing on the task at hand. The scout ship streaked across the alien sky, carrying them towards an uncertain future and the next phase of their perilous journey. Adventure. The stolen Barzan scout ship streaked through space, carrying them towards the coordinates of the ancient city Juno had glimpsed in her vision. George's hands flew over the unfamiliar controls, his brow furrowing in concentration. The ship's systems pulsed with an alien energy, seemingly resistant to his touch. Suddenly, a series of warning lights flashed across the console. "Something's wrong," George announced, his voice taut with tension. "The ship's power is fluctuating." Juno leaned forward, her scales shimmering with concern. "Let me try," she said, reaching for the controls. As her fingers made contact, the ship lurched violently. Sparks erupted from the console, filling the cockpit with the acrid smell of burning circuits. "It's rejecting us," Dr. Rodriguez called out, gripping her seat tightly. "The systems must be keyed to Barzan physiology." Colonel Hawkins pushed her way to the front, her eyes scanning the rapidly changing readouts. "We're caught in the gravity well of that gas giant," she reported grimly. "There's a moon on our port side. It might be our only chance for a controlled landing." George gritted his teeth, wrestling with the unresponsive controls. The scout ship plummeted through the moon's atmosphere, trailing fire and debris. Trees larger than skyscrapers loomed before them, their canopies a sea of bioluminescent color. "Brace for impact!" George shouted, pulling back on the controls with all his might. The ship plowed through the dense foliage, branches and vines screeching against the hull. With a bone-jarring crash, they slammed into the forest floor, skidding to a halt in a clearing of crushed vegetation. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, with a hiss of escaping pressure, the ship's hatch swung open. George stumbled out, helping a dazed Juno to her feet. Dr. Rodriguez and Colonel Hawkins followed, the latter immediately scanning their surroundings for potential threats. "Everyone okay?" George asked, his voice hoarse from the smoke-filled air. A chorus of affirmatives answered him. As the adrenaline of their crash landing faded, they took in their alien surroundings. The jungle pulsed with an otherworldly glow, plants and insects alike shimmering with bioluminescent light. Strange, warbling cries echoed through the trees, hinting at unseen creatures lurking in the shadows. Dr. Rodriguez moved quickly to assess their injuries, using the limited medical supplies they'd managed to salvage from the wreckage. "We're lucky," she muttered, applying a regenerative gel to a nasty cut on Hawkins's forehead. "It could have been much worse." George turned his attention to the ship, his heart sinking as he surveyed the damage. "The communication systems are fried," he reported. "We're cut off from Earth and Barzan alike." As the gravity of their situation settled in, Juno suddenly gasped. Her eyes widened, glowing faintly in the dim light of the alien forest. "I feel something," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "An energy. It's calling to me." George moved to her side, concern etched on his face. "What do you mean? Is it like before with the artifacts?" Juno shook her head, her gaze distant. "No, this is different. Stronger. It's coming from below us." She pointed towards the ground, her hand trembling slightly. "Could it be connected to the ancient city we were looking for?" George asked, his mind racing with possibilities. Before Juno could answer, a rustling in the nearby foliage caught their attention. Colonel Hawkins raised her weapon, aiming at the source of the disturbance. A vine-like tendril, easily as thick as a human arm, snaked out from between the trees. Its tip split open, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Move!" Hawkins shouted, firing a burst of energy at the carnivorous plant. The group scrambled back as more tendrils erupted from the surrounding jungle. George grabbed Juno's hand, pulling her away from a vine that nearly ensnared her ankle. Dr. Rodriguez yelped as one brushed against her arm, leaving an angry red welt. "This way!" George called out, spotting a narrow path between two massive tree trunks. They ran, dodging, grasping vines and leaping over bioluminescent roots that pulsed with eerie light. The alien jungle seemed to come alive around them, the very air thick with danger and the unknown. As they pushed deeper into the forest, following Juno's psychic intuition, new challenges emerged. Swarms of insects with gossamer wings descended upon them, their touch leaving George and Hawkins' skin tingling with numbness. "Don't let them land on you," Dr. Rodriguez warned, swatting at the air. "Their venom has a paralytic effect on human nervous systems." Juno, her alien biology seemingly immune to the insect's effects, took the lead. She guided them through the treacherous landscape, her instincts growing stronger with each step. After hours of grueling travel, they emerged into a clearing. Before them stood the crumbling remains of a massive structure, its architecture unmistakably Barzan in origin. Intricate patterns adorned its weathered surface, pulsing faintly with residual energy. "This is it," Juno breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "The source of the energy I've been feeling." As they approached the ancient ruin, George noticed a familiar symbol carved into a fallen stone column. It matched the markings on the artifacts they'd used to amplify Juno's abilities. He reached out, tracing the symbol with his fingers. With a low rumble, the ground beneath their feet began to shift. The group stumbled back as a hidden mechanism activated, revealing a yawning chasm in the jungle floor. Stone steps, untouched by time, spiraled down into the darkness below. George exchanged glances with his companions, a mix of anticipation and trepidation evident on their faces. Whatever secrets this underground complex held, they were about to uncover them. "Well," he said, taking a deep breath, "I guess there's only one way to go from here." With Juno at his side and the others close behind, George took his first step into the unknown depths of the ancient Barzan facility. The mysteries of a long-lost civilization awaited them, along with dangers they could scarcely imagine. As George took his first step onto the ancient stone stairs, a surge of energy rippled through the air. The walls of the underground passage flickered to life, illuminating their descent with a soft blue-green glow. Juno gasped, her eyes widening as she absorbed the alien script etched into the walls. "I can understand it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's speaking to me." George glanced at her, noting the faint luminescence emanating from her scales. "What does it say?" "It's a warning," Juno replied, her brow furrowing. "And an invitation. Only those who seek unity may unlock the secrets within." As they reached the bottom of the staircase, they found themselves in a vast chamber. Crystalline structures jutted from the floor and ceiling, pulsing with an inner light that seemed to respond to their presence. At the center of the room stood a towering pillar of intertwined crystal and metal, its surface covered in intricate patterns similar to those on the artifacts they had encountered before. Dr. Rodriguez approached one of the smaller crystals, her scientific curiosity piqued. "The energy readings from these structures are off the charts," she said, consulting her handheld device. "They seem to be reacting to our presence, especially to Juno." Colonel Hawkins remained vigilant, her weapon at the ready. "Stay alert. We don't know what kind of defenses this place might have." George and Juno exchanged a glance, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They approached the central pillar, drawn by an inexplicable urge to connect with it. As they neared, the patterns on its surface began to shift and swirl, responding to their proximity. I think we need to touch it," George said, his hand hovering over the pillar's surface. Juno nodded, her own hand mirroring his. "Together," she agreed. As their palms made contact with the cool, smooth surface of the pillar, a surge of energy exploded through the chamber. George and Juno found themselves enveloped in a cocoon of pulsating light, their bodies lifting slightly off the ground. The energy flowed through them, around them, connecting them in ways they could never have imagined. George's mind expanded, filled with the knowledge and memories of countless Barzan generations. He saw the rise and fall of their civilization, the loss of their abilities, and the long-forgotten truths of their history. Beside him, Juno experienced a similar revelation, her understanding of her own people deepening with each passing second. The light intensified, growing brighter and brighter until it was almost blinding. Dr. Rodriguez and Colonel Hawkins shielded their eyes, unable to look directly at the spectacle before them. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, leaving George and Juno standing hand in hand before the pillar. They turned to face their companions, and the changes were immediately apparent. A faint shimmering aura surrounded their bodies, and their eyes held a depth of knowledge that hadn't been there before. George flexed his fingers, feeling the newfound power coursing through his veins. "Are you both all right?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, approaching cautiously. George nodded, his voice steady. "We're fine. Better than fine, actually. We've been changed." Juno's eyes met George's, and a spark of understanding passed between them. Without speaking, they communicated their shared experiences, their newfound abilities, and the deep bond that now connected them. "The defensive systems," Juno said aloud, turning to address Colonel Hawkins. "We can deactivate them now." Together, George and Juno moved around the chamber, their hands gliding over various crystalline structures. As they worked, the hostile energy that had permeated the facility began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of welcome and openness. "It's done," George announced. "The complex is safe now." As the group began to explore the newly accessible areas of the facility, a tremor ran through the ground beneath their feet. Dust and small debris rained down from the ceiling, and a low, ominous rumble filled the air. "What was that?" Colonel Hawkins demanded, her weapon raised once more. George and Juno exchanged a worried glance, their enhanced senses picking up on something the others couldn't perceive. "The energy release," George explained. "It wasn't just contained to this facility. We've sent out a beacon." "A beacon?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, her voice tinged with concern. Juno nodded grimly. "To both Barzan and Earth forces. They're coming." As if to confirm her words, the distant sound of ships entering the atmosphere reached their ears. The group rushed to a nearby console, using their newfound understanding of the ancient technology to bring up a display of the moon's surface. Multiple ships were descending rapidly, their energy signatures identifying them as both Barzan and human vessels. "King Zornak's forces," Juno said, pointing to one cluster of ships. "And that must be an Earth expeditionary fleet." Colonel Hawkins leaned in, studying the tactical display. "They're on a collision course. If they make contact, it could spark an interstellar war." George felt a surge of drive, amplified by his connection to Juno. "We can't let that happen. We need to use what we've learned, what we've become, to stop this before it starts." Juno nodded, her hand finding George's. As their fingers intertwined, they felt their shared power intensify. "The communication systems," she said. "We can use them to broadcast a message to both fleets." They moved as one to the central console, their minds working in perfect synchronization. As they interfaced with the ancient Barzan technology, George and Juno prepared to send a message that could change the course of human-Barzan relations forever. The fate of two species now rested in their hands, their newfound abilities the key to averting disaster and ushering in a new era of cooperation, understanding, and peace. As George and Juno's fingers danced across the ancient console, their minds intertwined, crafting a message that would resonate with both human and Barzan hearts. The facility hummed with energy, channeling their combined power into a broadcast that pierced through the atmosphere and into space. "People of Earth and Barzan," their voices rang out in unison, echoing through the communication systems of both approaching fleets. "We stand at a crossroads of our shared destiny. The secrets of the past have been unlocked, revealing a truth that binds our species together. We are not enemies, but long-lost kin, separated by time and space. The power to shape our future lies within us all." The message continued, detailing the revelations they had uncovered and the potential for a new era of cooperation and mutual growth. As the last words faded, the group held their breath, watching the tactical display for any sign of the fleet's response. Moments later, the incoming vessels began to slow their approach. Communications chatter erupted between the two fleets as they processed the information they had received. Colonel Hawkins let out a relieved sigh. "It's working. They're not engaging each other." Before they could celebrate their success, a violent tremor shook the facility. Alarms blared as the ancient structure groaned under the strain of long-dormant systems reactivating. "What's happening?" Dr. Rodriguez shouted over the cacophony. George and Juno shared a concerned look. "The facility," George explained, his hands flying over the console. "It's powering up fully. I think our broadcast triggered some kind of fail-safe protocol." As they worked to stabilize the systems, the ground beneath their feet began to shift. The walls of the chamber rippled like liquid, rearranging themselves into new configurations. A previously hidden doorway materialized, sliding open to reveal a dimly lit corridor. "We need to go," Juno urged, her instincts screaming danger. "This place is becoming unstable." The group hurried towards the exit, George and Juno leading the way with their enhanced senses, guiding them through the shifting labyrinth. As they emerged from the underground complex, they found themselves facing an unexpected sight. A sleek, dark vessel hovered silently above the clearing, its design unlike anything they had seen before. The ship's boarding ramp extended, and a figure descended, flanked by a small contingent of armed Barzans. George felt Juno tense beside him, her emotions flooding through their shared connection. Recognition, surprise, and a complex mix of affection and wariness washed over him. "Lyra," Juno breathed, her eyes fixed on the approaching figure. The newcomer, a younger Barzan female with iridescent scales and piercing eyes, strode towards them with purpose. Her gaze locked onto Juno, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Hello, sister," Lyra said, her voice carrying both warmth and steel. "It seems we have much to discuss." George's mind reeled as he processed this new development. Juno had never mentioned having a sister, let alone one who commanded her own ship and soldiers. He could sense Juno's turmoil through their link, a whirlwind of ungrit emotions and long-buried memories. Colonel Hawkins stepped forward, her weapon lowered but ready. "Identify yourself and state your purpose." Lyra turned her attention to the human officer, her posture radiating authority despite her youth. "I am Princess Lyra of the Barzan Royal House, and I'm here to prevent a catastrophe. Our homeworld stands on the brink of civil war, and we need your help to stop it." She went on to explain the dire situation unfolding on Barzan Prime. King Zorac, faced with mounting pressure from the populace after the broadcast, had become increasingly unstable and violent. His loyal forces were cracking down on dissenters, using brutal tactics to maintain control. "We intercepted your transmission," Lyra continued, her eyes darting between George and Juno. "The truth you've uncovered could be the key to overthrowing Zornak's regime and ushering in a new era for our people. But we must act quickly." George felt a surge of determination coursing through him, amplified by his connection to Juno. He turned to Colonel Hawkins and Dr. Rodriguez. "You two should stay here, continue studying the facility, and coordinate with the Earth Fleet. We'll go with Lyra to Barzan Prime." Juno nodded in agreement, her hand finding George's. "Our abilities might be the edge needed to turn the tide against Zorac." As they boarded Lyra's ship, George couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. They were about to plunge headfirst into a conflict that could reshape the future of two civilizations. The ship's engines hummed to life, and George watched through a viewport as the alien moon grew smaller beneath them. Beside him, Juno's scales shimmered with nervous energy. Through their link, he could sense her conflicting emotions about returning home and facing her past. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, silently conveying his support. As the ship accelerated towards Barzan Prime, George and Juno began to focus inward, exploring the depths of their new hybrid abilities. They discovered they could share sensory experiences, seeing through each other's eyes and feeling what the other felt. This newfound intimacy brought them even closer, but also presented challenges as they struggled to maintain their individual identities. The journey to Barzan Prime was tense, filled with strategy sessions and hurried preparations. Lyra briefed them on the latest intelligence, painting a grim picture of the situation they were about to face. As they approached Barzan airspace, Captain Vex, Lyra's skilled pilot, announced their imminent arrival. "Brace yourselves," Vex called out, his hands dancing over the ship's controls. "We're about to hit heavy resistance." True to his words, the sky around them erupted with weapons fire as King Zornac's forces moved to intercept them. The ship rocked violently as Vex executed a series of dizzying maneuvers, weaving through the barrage of energy beams and missiles. George and Juno stood side by side on the bridge, their enhanced senses allowing them to track the chaotic battle around them. Through their shared perception, they assisted Vex in spotting incoming threats and identifying weaknesses in the enemy formation. Despite Vex's exceptional piloting skills, a lucky shot from a Barzan cruiser clipped their ship's wing. Alarms blared as the vessel began to lose altitude, spiraling towards the planet's surface. "Hold on!" Vex shouted, fighting with the controls. "This landing's going to be rough." As the ground rushed up to meet them, George wrapped his arms around Juno, their bodies glowing with a protective aura. He could feel her fear and persistence mingling with his own, their shared strength giving them hope in the face of the impending crash. With a deafening roar and a bone-jarring impact, the ship plowed into the outskirts of the Barzan capital city. As the dust settled and the ringing in their ears subsided, George and Juno emerged from the wreckage, hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in the war-torn streets of Barzan Prime. As the dust settled and the ringing in their ears subsided, George and Juno emerged from the wreckage, hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in the war-torn streets of Barzan's capital city. The scene that greeted them was one of chaos and destruction. Buildings crumbled under the weight of ongoing battles, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of weapons fire. George and Juno shared a determined look, their hybrid senses allowing them to navigate the treacherous landscape with uncanny precision. They made their way through the city, their enhanced abilities proving invaluable as they dodged falling debris and avoided pockets of intense fighting. Their goal was clear: reach the palace and confront King Zorac. As they approached the towering structure of the royal palace, they could feel the very air around them crackling with energy. Something had changed, and not for the better. The palace itself seemed to warp and shift before their eyes, its once majestic architecture now a twisted reflection of the power that dwelled within. George and Juno paused at the entrance, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. Through their mental link, they shared a moment of silent communication, reaffirming their bond and their commitment to seeing this through together. With a shared nod, they pushed open the massive doors and entered the palace. The interior was a maze of distorted corridors and shifting rooms, but their hybrid senses guided them unerringly towards the source of the energy they felt. As they approached the throne room, the walls around them began to pulse with an eerie light. The doors to the chamber burst open of their own accord, revealing a sight that made even their enhanced minds reel. King Zorac hovered above his throne, his body grotesquely enlarged and pulsating with veins of glowing energy. The throne room itself had been transformed into a surreal landscape, with furniture and decorations orbiting the king in a chaotic dance. The moment Zorac laid eyes on them, he attacked. Waves of telekinetic force slammed into George and Juno, threatening to crush them where they stood. Acting on instinct, they combined their abilities, creating a protective barrier that barely withstood the assault. As they struggled against the onslaught, George and Juno quickly realized that their individual powers were no match for the king's amplified abilities. They needed a new strategy, and fast. With a shared thought, they began to move in perfect synchronization. Their hybrid physiology allowed them to act as a single entity, weaving through Zorac's attacks with fluid grace. They used the floating debris as cover, launching quick counterattacks that kept the king off balance. The battle intensified, and the palace began to crumble under the strain of the immense energies being unleashed. Cracks spider-webbed across the walls of the throne room, and chunks of the ceiling crashed down around them. In the midst of the chaos, Juno's eyes locked onto a familiar object floating among the debris, the royal scepter of Barza. A memory surfaced, an ancient legend about the scepter's ability to channel and control Barzan energy. She shared this information with George through their mental link, and a plan began to form. George took the lead, launching a series of telekinetic attacks to draw Zorac's attention. Meanwhile, Juno maneuvered through the chaos, inching closer to the scepter. Just as her fingers brushed its surface, Zorac sensed her intent and unleashed a massive energy blast that sent her flying across the room. Seeing Juno in danger, George tapped into a reserve of strength he didn't know he possessed. He launched himself at King Zorac, engaging the transformed monarch in close-quarters combat. The king, unused to physical confrontation, struggled to defend himself against George's military hand-to-hand techniques. Juno, recovering quickly, seized the opportunity to make another attempt at the scepter. This time, her hand closed around it, and she felt a surge of power course through her body. Drawing on her innate understanding of Bred technology, enhanced by her hybrid abilities, Juno activated the scepter. A beam of intense energy shot from the scepter, enveloping King Zorac. The king's agonized scream filled the chamber as the scepter began to drain the excess energy from his body. His form shrank, the pulsating veins of power fading as he reverted to his original state. George, reacting swiftly, used the debris scattered around the throne room to bind the weakened king. With Zorac subdued, George and Juno turned their attention to the collapsing palace. Working in tandem, they used their combined abilities to stabilize the structure, preventing further destruction. As the dust settled, the sound of cheering rebels filled the air, signaling the end of Zorac's reign. Exhausted but triumphant, George and Juno shared a moment of relief, their hybrid bond stronger than ever. Their respite was short-lived, however, as Princess Lyra entered the throne room, accompanied by a group of rebel leaders. The real work, they realized, was just beginning. The challenges of rebuilding a government and uniting a fractured people loomed before them, promising to test their newfound abilities in ways they had yet to imagine. Imagine, the task of rebuilding Barzan society and establishing a new government would require all their skills and patience. As they prepared to address the gathered rebels and discuss the next steps, Dr. Rodriguez's voice crackled over their communication devices. "George, Juno, we have an urgent situation. I need you back at the research facility immediately." The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. George and Juno exchanged a quick glance, their hybrid bond allowing them to communicate without words. They turned to Princess Lyra, who nodded in understanding. "Go," she said. "We'll handle things here for now." Without wasting a moment, George and Juno made their way to a waiting transport. As they sped towards the research facility, Juno reached out through their mental link. "What do you think this is about?" George's response was tinged with concern. "Whatever it is, it must be serious to pull us away now." Upon arriving at the facility, they found Dr. Rodriguez pacing nervously in front of a holographic display. Her eyes widened as she saw them enter. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, gesturing them closer. "I've made a discovery that changes everything." Dr. Rodriguez launched into an explanation, her words tumbling out in a rush. As she spoke, the holographic display came to life, showing complex data streams and star charts. "The ancient Barzan technology we've been studying," she said, pointing to a pulsating point on the map. "It's not just a relic. It's a key to something much bigger and much more dangerous." George and Juno listened intently as Dr. Rodriguez revealed the existence of a dormant alien superweapon hidden within the Barzan system. The implications were staggering, a device capable of destabilizing the fabric of space-time itself. "We need to act fast," Dr. Rodriguez concluded. "If this weapon were to fall into the wrong hands or accidentally activate—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. The gravity of the situation was clear. Within hours, an emergency meeting was convened. Princess Lyra, rebel leaders, and Earth representatives gathered to discuss this new threat. The room buzzed with tension as Dr. Rodriguez presented her findings. As the implications sank in, a consensus quickly formed. The potential galactic threat posed by the superweapon had to take precedence over ongoing political concerns. "We'll form a joint human Barzan task force," Colonel Hawkins announced, her voice firm. "Our primary objective will be to locate and neutralize this weapon." All eyes turned to George and Juno. Their unique hybrid abilities made them the obvious choice to lead the mission. "We'll do it," George said, speaking for both of them. Juno nodded in agreement, her scales shimmering with drive. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Using data from the ancient Barzan facility, the task force narrowed down the likely location of the superweapon to a massive asteroid in the outer reaches of the Barzan system. As they boarded the cutting-edge stealth ship designed for the mission, George felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Beside him, Juno's emotions mirrored his own, their hybrid bond allowing them to draw strength from each other. The journey to the asteroid was tense. As they approached their target, the ship's sensors began to pick up unusual energy readings. "There's something not right about this asteroid," the Barzan navigator muttered, frowning at his instruments. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. "Collision imminent," the computer warned. George's hands flew over the controls, his hybrid reflexes allowing him to react with superhuman speed. The ship veered sharply, narrowly avoiding impact with an invisible barrier. "A cloaking field," Juno breathed, her eyes wide. "The entire asteroid is hidden." As they maneuvered around the asteroid, searching for a safe landing spot, the true nature of their target became clear. This was no natural formation. The entire celestial body was an artificial construction, built to house and protect the superweapon. They touched down on a flat expanse of the asteroid's surface, the ship's landing gear sinking slightly into the dusty ground. As the team prepared to disembark, George and Juno shared a moment of silent communication through their mental link. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The fate of not just two worlds, but potentially the entire galaxy, rested on their shoulders. As they stepped out onto the asteroid's surface, the enormity of their task loomed before them, a challenge unlike any they had faced before. Before them, the team moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the asteroid's low gravity. As they approached a massive structure that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, their sensors began to go haywire. George and Juno exchanged a glance, their hybrid senses picking up on something beyond what their instruments could detect. "There's a power source," Juno said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's calling to us." George nodded, feeling the same inexplicable pull. They led the team deeper into the facility, navigating through winding corridors that seemed to shift and change as they passed. Suddenly, they found themselves in a vast chamber. At its center stood a pulsating orb of energy, suspended in midair, the superweapon. As George and Juno approached, tendrils of energy reached out towards them, reacting to their hybrid physiology. The rest of the team hung back, unable to withstand the intense radiation emanating from the device. "We need to shut it down," George said, his voice strained as he fought against the weapon's pull. Juno nodded, her scales shimmering with reflected energy. Together, they reached out, their hybrid abilities allowing them to interface with the alien technology. The moment they made contact, a surge of power coursed through them. Images flashed through their minds, glimpses of an ancient war, of civilizations rising and falling, of the very fabric of space-time twisting and bending. They pushed through the flood of information, focusing on their task. But as they worked to deactivate the weapon, something went wrong. The energy output began to spike, the orb pulsing faster and brighter. "It's destabilizing," Juno shouted over the growing roar of energy. George tried to pull away, but found himself unable to break contact. "We're locked in." The rest of the team scrambled to evacuate, but George and Juno remained trapped, their bodies now glowing with the same energy as the weapon. As the facility began to shake and crumble around them, Captain Vex's voice came through their comms. "We need to leave now. The asteroid is breaking apart." George and Juno shared one last look, their bond allowing them to communicate without words. They knew what they had to do. With a final push of their combined strength, they poured their hybrid energy into the weapon, trying to contain its power long enough for their team to escape. The last thing they saw was a blinding flash of light as the facility imploded around them. Then, everything went white. When the light faded, George and Juno found themselves suspended in a shimmering bubble of energy. Their bodies flickered between solid form and pure energy, their minds stretched across space and time. They could sense the rescue ship fleeing the blast radius, carrying their teammates to safety, but they were trapped, caught in a limbo between physical existence and energy state. Time seemed to lose all meaning. They drifted, their consciousness expanding beyond the confines of their bodies. They saw glimpses of possible futures, of distant worlds, of technologies beyond their comprehension. Through it all, their bond remained unbroken. Their hybrid nature, further altered by their fusion with the alien technology, allowed them to survive in this impossible state. They were aware of the passage of time, of the rescue ship returning to Barza with news of their apparent demise. They felt the grief of their friends and allies, but were powerless to reach out, to let them know they still existed. Then, after what could have been days or years, they sensed a new presence approaching. A ship unlike any they had encountered before was nearing their energy bubble. As the ship drew closer, George and Juno felt a surge of hope. They could sense familiar presences aboard. Dr. Rodriguez, Princess Lyra, and others they couldn't quite identify. The rescue team's initial attempts to penetrate the anomaly failed, but George and Juno could feel their willpower. They pushed against the boundaries of their energy prison, trying to make contact. Finally, they felt a connection, fragmented and distorted. But a connection nonetheless. They poured their essence into it, trying to convey that they were alive, that they needed help. The response was immediate. The rescue ship's energy output changed, creating a swirling vortex that reached towards their bubble. George and Juno felt a pull, a chance at escape. But something was wrong. Their energy forms were too unstable, too diffuse to pass through the vortex on their own. They needed an anchor, something to guide them back to physical form. Just as despair began to set in, they sensed a new presence entering their realm. A small craft, piloted by a single, determined individual, pushed through the barrier of their energy bubble. George and Juno latched onto this new arrival, using it as a focal point to gather their scattered essence. As they coalesced around the craft, they began to feel the pull of physical reality once more. The journey back through the vortex was a blur of sensation and energy. When they finally emerged on the other side, they found themselves in semi-corporeal form, supported by the pilot who had risked everything to save them. As their rescuer helped them into a containment chamber designed to stabilize their condition, George and Juno caught glimpses of familiar faces. Dr. Rodriguez, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and elation. Zara, the Barzan scientist, frantically adjusting controls. And others they had thought they might never see again. Their bodies slowly began to solidify, though they could feel that they were fundamentally changed. Their skin shimmered with residual energy, their eyes glowed with an inner light, and their minds were filled with knowledge and power beyond anything they had ever imagined. As the rescue ship began its journey back to Barza, George and Juno shared a look of wonder and apprehension. They had survived, but at what cost? And what would this transformation mean for their future? For the future of human-Barzan relations, and for the galaxy at large. As they approached Barza, where they knew a gathering of leaders awaited news of their fate, George and Juno steeled themselves for what was to come. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bonds stronger than ever, their hybrid nature now infused with the power and knowledge of an ancient, advanced civilization. The rescue ship entered Barzan orbit, and George and Juno prepared to step into a new chapter of their lives, one that promised to be filled with even greater adventures and challenges than they had faced before. The rescue ship descended through Barza's atmosphere, its hull still vibrating with residual energy from the anomaly. Inside, George and Juno sat in the specialized containment chamber, their bodies flickering between solid form and pure energy. As they approached the planet's surface, a sense of apprehension settled over them. The moment the ship touched down, they were rushed to a secure medical facility. Dr. Rodriguez and Zara, along with a team of human and Barzan scientists, swarmed around them, their faces a mix of concern and fascination. "We need to stabilize their molecular structure," Dr. Rodriguez barked, her fingers flying over a complex array of controls. "Zara, increase the containment field's frequency." The air around George and Juno shimmered as the scientists worked tirelessly to anchor their fluctuating forms. After hours of intense effort, their bodies finally solidified, though an otherworldly glow still emanated from their skin. As George stepped out of the containment chamber, he stumbled, overwhelmed by the flood of sensory input. The hum of electronic devices, the thoughts of those around him, even the planet's magnetic field, all of it crashed into his consciousness. Juno reached out, steadying him. "Focus on me," she said, her voice echoing in his mind. "Use our bond as an anchor." Their eyes met, and for a moment the chaos receded. but their moment of peace was short-lived. Alarms blared throughout the facility. Nearby screens flickered and died, plunging sections of the building into darkness. George realized with a start that he and Juno were the source of the disruption, their newly acquired energy manipulation abilities, wreaking havoc on the surrounding technology. "We need to get them to a shielded area," Zara shouted over the din. "Now!" As they were rushed through the corridors, George caught glimpses of fear and mistrust on the faces of the staff they passed. The implications of their transformation were starting to sink in. They were no longer just hybrids, but something entirely new and potentially dangerous. Days turned into weeks as George and Juno underwent extensive testing. They struggled to control their enhanced abilities, each success matched by a setback. During one particularly frustrating session, George's frustration manifested as a burst of energy that shattered every piece of equipment in the room. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I don't know how to stop it." Dr. Rodriguez placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, careful to avoid direct skin contact. "We'll figure this out together," she assured him. "Your transformation is unprecedented, but so is the potential it holds." Outside the research facility, tensions were rising. News of George and Juno's altered state had spread, sparking heated debates across Barza and Earth. Princess Lyra, now serving as interim leader, found herself besieged by demands for action. Senator Krell, a charismatic Barzan known for his conservative views, stood before a crowd of protesters, his voice carrying across the capital city's main square. "These so-called hybrids are no longer human or Barzan," he proclaimed, his scales flashing with righteous indignation. "They are abominations, threats to the purity of both our species. We must isolate them before they contaminate us all." The crowd roared its approval, their anger and fear palpable. Princess Lyra watched the scene unfold from her office, her face grim. "We need to act," she said to Admiral Thorne, who stood beside her. "This situation is spiraling out of control." Admiral Thorne nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I may have a solution," he said. "A way to turn this crisis into an opportunity." He outlined his plan, Operation Starburst, a revolutionary spacecraft powered by George and Juno's unique abilities, capable of faster-than-light travel. It was a bold proposal, one that could showcase the benefits of human-Barzan cooperation and provide a common goal for both species. Princess Lyra's eyes lit up with hope. "Make it happen," she ordered. As preparations for Operation Starburst began, George and Juno found solace in each other. Their shared experiences and altered physiology created a level of intimacy beyond normal understanding. They communicated without words, their thoughts and emotions flowing freely between them. But even as their bond deepened, new challenges arose. George began experiencing vivid, fragmented visions, glimpses of a vast armada of alien ships, bearing down on their galaxy with unstoppable force. "We need to warn them," George insisted, his eyes wild with urgency. "The threat is real, and it's coming." Juno placed her hands on either side of his face, her touch calming the storm of images in his mind. "We will," she assured him, "but first we need to make them understand." Together, they worked to focus George's visions, using their energy manipulation powers to create a holographic projection of the alien fleet. When they finally succeeded, the reaction was immediate and intense. Admiral Thorne stared at the holographic display, his face pale. "How long do we have?" George shook his head. "I'm not sure. The visions aren't clear on timeframes, but we need to act fast." The revelation of the impending threat accelerated the timeline for Operation Starburst. Resources were poured into the project, with George and Juno at its heart. Their ability to interface directly with the ship's systems led to technological breakthroughs that left even the most experienced engineers in awe. But as excitement built among the project team, opposition to George and Juno's presence on Barza intensified. Senator Krell's rhetoric grew more inflammatory, his followers more aggressive. Isolated incidents of violence against pro-alliance individuals began to occur with alarming frequency. Princess Lyra, in a bold move to protect George and Juno and legitimize their role in the alliance, appointed them as official ambassadors of the Human Barzan Alliance. The decision was met with mixed reactions. further polarizing an already divided population. As the Starburst spacecraft neared completion, tension on Barza reached a boiling point. Senator Krell, seeing his influence waning as the project's potential became clear, decided to take drastic action. On the eve of the Starburst's maiden voyage, alarms blared throughout the research facility. Security feeds showed Krell and his followers storming the building, armed and clearly intent on reaching George and Juno. "We need to evacuate," Admiral Thorne's voice crackled over the comm system. "Get to the Starburst. It's our only chance." George and Juno shared a look of understanding. They had known this moment might come, had prepared for it. With a nod, they joined hands and stepped out to face the oncoming storm. The corridor ahead was chaos. Krell's forces clashed with security personnel, energy weapons flashing. George and Juno moved as one, their powers flaring to life. They created energy shields, deflecting attacks and clearing a path to the launch bay. As they fought their way forward, George caught sight of Krell, his scales glinting in the harsh light of the facility. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and George saw the fear beneath the senator's anger. Fear of the unknown, of change, of a future he couldn't control. They reached the Starburst just as Krell's forces breached the final security checkpoint. Admiral Thorne and a small, loyal crew were already aboard, the ship's systems humming to life. "Are you sure about this?" Admiral Thorne asked as George and Juno took their positions at the heart of the ship's power core. Juno nodded, her eyes glowing with drive. "We can't stay here. We'll only bring more conflict. Out there," she gestured to the stars beyond, "we have a chance to make a difference." As the Starburst's engines roared to life, George and Juno poured their energy into the ship's systems. The facility around them faded away, replaced by the vast expanse of space. They were leaving behind everything they had known, venturing into an uncertain future. But as the ship accelerated, breaking free from Barza's atmosphere, George and Juno felt a sense of purpose settle over them. They were no longer caught between two worlds. They were forging a path to save them both. The alien threat loomed ahead, a challenge unlike any they had faced before. Yet as they sped towards their destiny, George and Juno knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Together, their bond stronger than ever. As the Starburst spacecraft broke through Barza's atmosphere, the ship trembled violently, buffeted by the turbulent air currents and the stress of its unprecedented acceleration. George and Juno, still connected to the ship's core systems, felt every vibration and strain. Through their enhanced senses, they detected the approaching danger before the ship's sensors could register it. "Admiral," George called out, his voice tight with urgency, "we've got company." Admiral Thorne's hands flew over the control panel, bringing up the rear-view screens. The sight that greeted them sent a chill through the crew, a swarm of smaller craft, filled with weapons, rapidly gaining on them. "Krell's forces," Thorne growled, his teeth clenched. "They're not giving up without a fight." The pursuing ships opened fire, energy bolts streaking past the Starburst hull. Thorne's expert piloting kept them one step ahead, but it was clear they couldn't outrun their attackers forever. "We need more power to the engines," Thorne shouted over the whine of stressed machinery. George and Juno exchanged a silent look of understanding. In perfect synchronization, they channeled their hybrid energy into the ship's systems. The Starburst responded instantly, surging forward with renewed vigor. As they cleared Barza's gravity well, Thorne's voice cut through the chaos. "Preparing for FTL jump. George, Juno, we need you." The hybrid pair took their positions at the heart of the ship's power core. They had never attempted this before, but their shared consciousness guided them instinctively. As one, they reached out with their minds, interfacing directly with the experimental faster-than-light drive. The ship lurched violently as the drive engaged. Stars streaked into lines of light, then vanished altogether as they plunged into the swirling void of hyperspace. The sudden transition overwhelmed their pursuers, leaving Krell's forces far behind in normal space. For a moment, triumph surged through the crew, but their celebration was short-lived. Alarms blared throughout the ship as critical systems began to fail under the strain of the untested jump. "Power fluctuations in the core," one of the engineers shouted. "We're losing containment." George and Juno didn't need the warning. They could feel the ship's pain as if it were their own. Without hesitation, they poured their energy into the failing systems, their bodies glowing with an otherworldly light. The rest of the crew watched in awe as the two hybrids worked in perfect unison, their movements fluid and precise. Slowly, the alarms quieted, and the ship's violent shuddering eased. As the Starburst emerged from hyperspace, George and Juno collapsed, their energies temporarily depleted. Admiral Thorne rushed to their side, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" he asked, helping them to their feet. George nodded weakly. "We'll recover." But the ship... His words trailed off as he looked up at the main view screen. The sight that greeted them stole the breath from every person on the bridge. A vast armada of alien ships filled the screen, their sleek, otherworldly designs unlike anything they had ever encountered. The sheer scale of the fleet was staggering, dwarfing their single ship to insignificance. "Battle stations!" Thorne barked, his training kicking in despite the overwhelming odds. But George held up a hand, his eyes distant. "Wait," he said softly. "Something's not right." Juno nodded, her expression mirroring George's. "I can sense fear, confusion. These aren't conquerors." Using their hybrid abilities, George and Juno reached out with their minds, establishing a tentative telepathic link with the alien fleet's command ship. The connection was difficult, alien thoughts and emotions washing over them in a disorienting flood. As understanding dawned, George turned to Admiral Thorne, his eyes wide with amazement. "They're refugees," he explained, "fleeing from some kind of disaster in their home galaxy." Juno continued, her voice filled with wonder. "The ancient Barzan civilization must have misinterpreted their appearance, their advanced technology. They're not here to invade. They're looking for a new home." Admiral Thorne's tactical mindset quickly adapted to this new information. "Can you communicate with them?" he asked. "Let them know we're not a threat?" George and Juno nodded in unison, their energies intertwining as they focused on the alien minds. Through a combination of mental images and emotions, they conveyed their peaceful intentions and their desire for dialogue. The response was immediate. The tension in the alien fleet visibly eased, weapons systems powering down across hundreds of ships. A clear channel opened between the Starburst and the alien command vessel. As George and Juno acted as translators, Admiral Thorne's diplomatic skills came to the forefront. Hours passed as they negotiated a tentative ceasefire and laid the groundwork for further discussions. Just as it seemed they had achieved a breakthrough, the ship's long-range sensors lit up with a warning. George's face paled as he interpreted the data. "It's Krell," he announced grimly. "He's tracked us. His forces are approaching fast." Juno's eyes met George's, a spark of inspiration passing between them. "We have an idea," she said to Thorne, "but it's risky." Without waiting for a response, George and Juno joined hands, their combined powers surging. They projected a massive illusion into space, a perfect replica of the alien fleet moving to intercept Krell's approaching ships. The deception was flawless. On the sensors, they watched as Krell's forces abruptly changed course, fleeing in panic from the imaginary threat. As the immediate danger passed, George and Juno turned to face both the Alliance crew and the alien representatives on the monitor. Their eyes glowed with renewed purpose as they prepared to propose their daring plan, a plan that could change the course of 3 civilizations forever.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.